So Steven Mnuchin is Donald Trump's top fundraiser. His job is to raise all the money that Trump needs to beat Hillary Clinton in the general election this fall.
Are these two individuals who knew each other for a long time?
He will not say. Just like if you ask me how I know Zach Miter, I will not reveal it.
You will not reveal it.
They work together on deals. One of those deals, by the way, ended up in a lawsuit. But he says he's an old friend. Donald Trump, though, actually, in the new Washington Post book, says he doesn't really have friends. But suffice to say, Steven Mnuchin got an invitation to Trump Tower,
right,
to celebrate Donald Trump's New York primary win. And even though he was headed to a dinner downtown, he was like, yeah, I'll stop off. And when he was there at this cocktail party, he couldn't find Donald Trump. So he waited, and they finally saw Donald Trump, and Donald Trump kind of beckoned toward him. And he joined him for this ride up an escalator, and suddenly Steven Mnuchin was on stage with Donald Trump at the rally. And he was like, wow. And the next day, Donald Trump called him up and invited him to be his finance chairman.
Go figure. But what's his background? I mean, this is a guy who's well known to Wall Street, quite a pedigree, correct?
Quite a pedigree. Yeah, I mean, literally, his dad was just a monster, huge trader at Goldman Sachs. I think we don't have this in the story, but people called him Coach. It's just like people call me Coach as well in the newsroom. And, he followed his father to Yale. He had internships at Salomon Brothers in the 80s. He went to Goldman. He worked for Soros and for Eddie Mnuchin, his old Yale friend, so two huge hedge funds. He was a big Hollywood investor. He literally invested in Avatar, the most successful film of all time.
Yeah.
And bought a bank on top of it, One West.
Indian Mac, a well-known one during the financial crisis. Exactly. I think what's interesting about your story, the story that you guys write, is that the people who know him are kind of surprised that he took this position. Why is that?
Well, okay, so here's a guy who's had no background in politics whatsoever. He's given a little bit of money over the years because he's a wealthy guy. Most of it, he says, was just favors to friends who, was raising money for Clinton or Obama or whatever.
Yeah, lots of Democrats, right?
More money to Democrats than Republicans. He represents all of these kind of elite institutions that Trump fans are opposed to, like Goldman Sachs, right? Which Trump makes a lot of noise about on the campaign trail. And so a lot of people were surprised to see that all of a sudden he showed up, not just as a Trump supporter, but as a key person who's helping him get elected.
Let's talk about what's going on in this country. I'm looking at a price-earnings ratio of the S&P, and it climbed up over the summer, trailing earnings to over 20, and we're still sitting there. Do you think that equities here are fully valued or maybe even overvalued?
I think in general the market is very toppy. What we're noticing is there's relatively little growth in demand for physical product, and almost nobody has any kind of pricing power. That's not a good formula for earnings growth. Where the earnings growth has mostly been coming from is through cost savings. But at some point you run out of that. At some point you just can't cut costs anymore, and therefore you ultimately need pricing power and physical volume growth. And I think that's what's really lacking in today's world. So we have been net sellers for the last 18 months to a very, very large degree.
And of course, that's a criticism levied against the central banks that all this easy monetary policy hasn't done much to lift aggregate demand. So does this make it harder for the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates come December, as so many people expect them to do?
I think they should raise them. In fact, I think they should have raised them already, but for a very different set of reasons. First reason is, if all that's keeping our economy together is 25 basis points, we got nothing going on anyway. So I think it's ridiculous to make such a big to-do out of a 1/4% potential increase. And I believe that the dithering over it has created so much market uncertainty, both about interest rates and, more importantly, about the direction of the economy, that dithering has done far more damage than 25 basis points would. My second reason is that we, at some point, probably within the next 18 months, are likely to go into a recession, especially, frankly, if you have Hillary Clinton elected and she increases taxes. But with or without that, we have a great risk of going into recession. The Fed's toolbox is basically empty. They need to replenish that toolbox in order to have a way to help if and when we get into this recession that I see in the next 18 or so months.